And this is my motor expert dog. Okay, he teaches me everything. Hey guys, Johnny Nerd out here. Professional e-bike builder, mechanic, repairer. Wanted to touch on a video today. I wanted to touch on probably the biggest misconception that people have when it comes to hub motors and mid-drive motors. We're still in just the super infancy on these two motor types, even though they've been around in, the DIY conversion market for 20 years. These motors have been around for well over 100 years, but for DIY bicycle conversions, mid-drives are a little bit newer on the scene. And there's still just a lot of misinformation out there. And I'd say the biggest one that I get is in regards to a video that I put up on the difference between hub drives and mid-drives and how they work. So a mid-drive, they essentially get their power from the same place. They're both generated by a single motor that is being driven, and then there's a gear reduction inside there. This is the same for mid-drives and hub motors, unless you're using a direct drive hub motor, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But geared hub motors, a geared hub motor just means that there's a reduction gear in there. So the motor's spinning, and then there's a reduction gear in there that takes that super high RPM and gets it to a usable RPM. So it gives it more torque, because otherwise it would just have no torque. So both the motors essentially start off working the same way, with a gear reduction that gets the motor spinning to a specific RPM. But then this is where the main differences change, because a hub motor is fixed on that. You could add, the motor is only going to drive that wheel with that single fixed gear reduction gear ratio, if that makes sense. You could add to it with your own human leg power through the cassette and through whatever drivetrain you have, but you're only adding your own human power to it. With the mid-drive, it starts off at the crank. That's where the motor is coming from, where the motor is powering it. All of that motor power is going to the rear cassette. So you could differentiate how that motor is applied, either in a low speed or a high speed. And you could see in that video, I've done hill climbing tests and top speed tests. And this is my motor expert dog. Okay, he teaches me everything. One of the biggest misconceptions I have is that all electric motors work the same, essentially. People say electric motors have instant torque right off the bat. Just look at a Tesla. For me, I'm like, that's a Tesla. That's an automotive car motor that has well over 100,000 watts per motor. And a lot of those cars have multiple motors. I think I was just reading this morning, the Tesla S has up to 625,000 watts of power. Yes, when you have that amount of power, you no longer need a transmission. With a bicycle, when you have 750 watts, I'm using street legal terms. I know a lot of people are like, well, I use a 20,000 watt motor and I don't need, okay, that's great. We're talking about street legal, 95% of bicycles out there, e-bicycles out there. 750 watts, it's not a lot of, there's a lot of strain on there. You put a 750 watt hub motor up against 8% grade, 10% grade, it can't do it. It doesn't have that amount of power. Yeah, you up that wattage to about 20, 30,000 watts, then all of a sudden it's just gonna go. There's nothing that could stop it. But when you're dealing with even 3,000 watts or less, I even rode, one of my customers brought by his, I think it was an 8,000 watt or 12,000 watt vector cycle, essentially. It was a 8,000 watt rear hub motor. And I went and took it to my spot that I tested, and I just gunned it from the standstill, and it didn't just take off. It still was like, it still struggled because that low end torque, there's no gearing in it. If that thing had 80,000 watts, it would have just gone, no problem. But when you're dealing with low powered motors, you absolutely need a transmission. So if you live anywhere near hills or where hill climbing is at all important to you, you need to get a mid-drive. There's no thinking. When people are like, yeah, I'm gonna go out hunting and I'm gonna take this bike up there, I'm thinking about getting this 750 watt hub motor or even this 1,000 watt hub motor, I'm thinking and they're saying yeah, I'll weigh about 350 pounds and I'm gonna be going up there and hauling. So I'm like, okay, that hub motor is not gonna be able to do it. You gotta stop thinking like it's a Tesla or that it's an electric car. Those are dealing with totally different power numbers. We're talking about 750 watts and 100,000 watts. That's not even close. What is 750 into 100,000? It's insane. That's the biggest misconception that people have, and they talk to me about it. I know we're still in infancy here, where information is getting out, but hopefully this makes sense to you guys. And direct hub motors are completely different. They're not the same as a geared hub motor. There's no gearing in it essentially. So those historically can just handle more power. You're able to put more watts to them and make them, but then you're no longer going to be street legal. So there's going to be a trade-off. But even then, usually it's not going to be powerful enough to do those steep inclines from a standstill like a mid-drive can. A mid-drive can outperform two hub motors in hill climbing almost every day. It just depends on gearing, and you're able to easily switch out that gearing. And I know that hub motors can be geared differently. Some hub motors are geared with a higher gear ratio inside that differential, inside the actual motor casing. There's just more teeth in there, so it changes that gear ratio. But it's still fixed to whatever it came from at the manufacturer. You know, if it's a 12-to-1 or whatever, it's fixed to that. Some motors come from the manufacturer at like a 20-to-1 gear ratio, so it's better for hill climbing and it's better for, you know, whatever. That gear ratio is different, but it's gonna have different motor characteristics. That's why I love mid-drives, is because you can switch it out easily. You can put a new front chainring on, bigger, smaller. You can change out your rear cassette easily and have like a crazy monster gear, like a 0.5-to-1 gear ratio for just like a wheelie machine, or that'll just literally climb anything or haul anything. You could put a trailer on it and haul 1,000 pounds worth of stuff if you wanted to. Would not want to do that on a hub motor, even if it's a direct drive running 72 volts. I just wouldn't want to do that. Motors like to spin fast. If your motor is not spinning fast and you're giving it a lot of amps, it creates heat, and that causes things to burn up. I live in Salt Lake City now, and I used to work at a bike shop that we used to only sell hub motors, because they're easier for a beginner to ride. Our demographic was beginners, just very like people who hadn't rode a bike ever or in like 30, 40 years. They just wanted to get on and go. Problem is, here in Salt Lake City, there's a lot of hills, and people would start going, trying to ride up there. They want to go explore, and they'd start riding up these hills, and the motors would just burn out. And so we would get them back, and we would have to replace motors a lot. If you live in a place that's like Florida, Louisiana, where the highest elevation is like 350 feet, and you do not need to go fast, you don't really care about hill climbing, hauling stuff, a hub motor might be good for you then. Honestly, I've recommended hub motors to people before in the past. I'm not like a hub motor hater. It's just my personal opinion that I really love mid-drives. And I think the vast majority of people, after they get used to riding a hub motor, are gonna wanna upgrade to a mid-drive. I think a hub motor is a good like training wheel bike to kind of get some good fundamentals down on how to ride your bike and how like a motor system feels. But then after you put like 1,000 miles on, or if you're already used to riding like motorcycles or something like that, or you're a really strong cyclist, you're gonna wanna upgrade to a mid-drive pretty fast, in my opinion. Maybe that's not the case, but I definitely think you will. Hopefully that helped. I know I'm still gonna get some people that don't understand it, and I think it's not your fault. I know I need to have like more graphics and more cartoons and stuff to like really show the differences, but I just don't have that budget and know-how. So I'm trying to do the best with just explaining stuff. If anybody has some better ideas, I just want to get, my whole goal is just to get good information out there. And there's a ton of bad information and just misinformation. People just assuming that, you know, these motors in cars work the same as they do in bicycles. And it's just completely flat out true. We got to stop. We got to dispel that. I'm trying to do my best, trying to be unbiased, but it is difficult when you are just a fanatic over one thing and you're like, this is a way better system. You know, Blu-ray and HD DVD, or I would say it's more like, for me, it's more like VHS and DVD, where, you know, hey, with the VHS, all you gotta do is just pop the tape in and hit the play button and it's gonna go. And there's 3 other buttons: rewind, fast forward. That's pretty good, but man, if you wanna really unlock the potential of watching movies and get 5.1 surround sound and hidden like director commentary, get a DVD. There's a bigger menu system. You gotta learn how to use it a little bit more. But man, once you figure out how to use a DVD player, you're never gonna go back to watching VHSs or buying VHSs. It's the same thing with hub motors and mid-drives. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with VHSs, and for some people, maybe a VHS VCR is the way to go. But it's like very, very small percentage. And then after a while, like, you're gonna wanna upgrade to your DVD player. That's just my opinion and my weird analogies. I know I have weird analogies, but I'm hoping that my whole goal is just to help people. I'm not here to try to shame anyone or try to be like a bike snob. That's not me. I just want to inform people and try to help you make the best decision. And if your ultimate goal is to get a hub-powered pre-made e-bike, that's fine. That might be the best solution for you. Then go for it. And you should not have any, don't listen to guys like me who are saying mid-drives, custom pre-made mid-drives are the way to go. They are for me. Maybe they're not for you. And there's no shame in that. But if you are doing hill climbing, if you are doing things like that, that's my point. Later, guys. Thanks.